Hello and welcome to the Book Tribe podcast, your guide to becoming a successful modern day author, whatever success looks like to you. And today we're delving into a topic that is actually relatively new to me, which is online book tours. And to help me guide me through this conversation, I should say, is Trish Collins, co-founder of TLC Book Tours, and they help authors to get their book into the hands of readers who are active on social media. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. As I say, I think this is going to be an educational conversation. I know we've briefly touched on this in a meeting prior to the podcast, but I think we're going to learn a lot from you today. But to begin with, we're going to start with some quick fire bookish questions. It's a tradition on the program. So is that okay with you if we do a few silly questions?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So the first question we have is there a book you wish everyone would read and why?
Gosh. Well,
They're not easy questions.
No. I think that's a question that would change depending on where I am in life. It probably would have been different in my early 20s. It's right now, there was just a book recently, and the name is escaping me, that one of the last really profound books that I read that just really moved me was Such Kindness by Andre Dubus III. He writes he wrote The House of Sand and Fog, which is known to be very dark, depressing. But what I like about it is that he really shines a light on some harder topics. Like in Such Kindness, he's really talking about somebody that has come from addiction and homelessness, and he started out just as a normal working class guy and fell off a roof, and but he handles it with, what I really want is I want a miraculous cure for the character. I don't want people to suffer, but there's none of that. It's just it's very small changes. And I think that is kind of life. And, I know for me, I look to books often for ideas about our human experience and what we can do as humans to be better, and how we can shape our lives. And so that one really has been something that
stuck with you.
I would love for other people to read.
Yeah, no, for me, one of the all-time kind of favorites that I'll recommend to anybody is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I don't know why. I read it years and years ago, but it stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
And it's, my preferred genre in general is romance, but this has elements of romance in it, but actually it's about the more complicated relationships between people, not just between a man and a woman. So the next question I have for you, Trish, is are you a night reader or an early morning reader?
Definitely a night reader. I'm not a morning person at all, but these days I'm an audiobook reader at like 1.5 speed, because I have 3 kids and I am often doing other things. There's not a lot of downtime in my life. Like 2 days ago, I was in the car for most of 5 hours, and we live in a relatively small area, but it was just a lot of driving back and forth. Kids needed to be here and there and picked up. And so definitely audiobooks, but if I'm reading, then I much prefer night reading because I don't want to be getting up in the morning anyways.
Yeah, I think I I have been a night reader. I think when I first started and it was obsessive and compulsive, I was reading and reading and reading into the late night. But actually now, with how busy I am and how tired I get I fall asleep at 10 p.m.,
Yes,
no
yes,
doubt. So I end up reading in the morning because I wake up at 6 o'clock. I don't start work till 10. So I'm like, well,
yeah,
I work from home. I just roll out of bed into my office.
yeah, yep.
And you kind of answered my next question, which was, are you team paperback, ebook, or audiobook? But I guess that's out of necessity that you kind of listen to audiobooks. Do you have a preference out of the three?
Yeah, well, I mean, these days, audiobooks for sure, because I can do it simultaneously with something else, especially, as just life gets more complicated and there's so much more for me to do. And at least, maybe I wouldn't say, it's just, I'm in a time period of my life that so much needs to be done all the time that it's nice to be able to multitask. I used to be very much anti ebooks, but I've really grown to love my Kindle, specifically because I'm very anti Amazon. So I use it specifically through the library and
Mm-hmm.
um and checking books out that way and having it just with me because I like to have a book with me wherever I go. My middle son takes hitting lessons for baseball every Wednesday, and when I was younger, I used to like read even when I was walking, and I don't know, like 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was like, there's a little taco truck nearby. So I take my Kindle, I turn it on, and I can walk. While I walk there, I order my food, I sit down, I read, and then I read all the way back. And so it's lighter, it's easier. So I will say I've been converted to ebooks. I'd be hard pressed to get a physical book now. That also has to do with moving a few times because books are
Right.
awful to move.
I
They're
know.
so heavy, it's been a struggle to deal with that in moving.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that an awful lot across the way that we consume books as a community. Is actually, physical books are a collection activity almost
Yes.
now, whereas you've got ebooks and audiobooks which are about necessity, ease of access, being able to carry loads of books in your pocket without having to lug them around. It's just
Mhm.
it's easier. So thank you for answering those questions, Trish. I really appreciate it. It's just good for us to get to know you a bit more. So let's start talking about book tours. Exactly what is a book tour? How do we define it for our audience?
So it's kind of like a physical tour, where you have stops that you go to, but instead these are online. It can be at a blog, on Instagram, on TikTok, and but typically the author isn't involved. It's just the book. So it's what I've come to view it as is readers doing recommendations online, because that's how, all of most book sales are word of mouth. And so to me, it's basically a word of mouth tour. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice, simple way of defining this for our audience, because I think, for me, when I first came across your website, I was like, oh, book tours, like they must tour the country. But
Yeah.
actually, no, this is a really niche service that the authors can tap into. How do you think it's changed over the last few years in terms of, where it started, where it is now, the transition in how people are recommending books?
Yeah, so it has changed a lot. It used to be that it was solely on blogs, but that was before Instagram came about. And then Instagram was invented, and as in any social media, you find people with the same interest find each other. And so that, of course, happened with readers, and they kind of coined the term bookstagram instead of Instagram. So Bookstagram is considered, anybody who ever really talks about books. You don't have to like only talk about books. I don't know that people who aren't entrenched in the Bookstagram community necessarily know about that. You definitely will find people talking about books, but not being part of that community. And, so we went from blogs to Instagram. And then a few years ago, when TikTok showed up, then you've got Book Talk. And I think especially with Bookstagram and TikTok, Book Talk, you really can see how important word of mouth is. And you know, it really does sell books. Publishers see that with how certain authors sell because people talk about them all the time or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's another tool. There's
Yes.
so many things that you can be doing. So it's just one in a toolbox.
Yeah, because I kind of I get that it's almost an extension of a social media marketing agenda, but more strategic. But I'm guessing that it's not an instant win for authors. Is that right?
No, it's not. And that's the hard part, is it's really kind of a long game. You know, it's interesting because it's hard to know who's going to do well on social media and who isn't. An author that I love so much, Simon Van Buie, like his stories touch me so much that I met him like 20 years ago, and I was with somebody else and I started to tell her the story that really moved me, and I couldn't even finish telling her the synopsis of this story because I was starting to cry.
Wow.
But so 20 years later, I followed his career, and somebody just posted on Instagram like, "Oh, I just got this book and I haven't seen it anywhere on Instagram." And I commented, "Yeah, he tends to fly under the social media radar. There are those of us who are avid fans. If most people who read him once really love, he just has this beautiful way of writing, and his stories are so touching and beautiful. But I don't know, it just doesn't, so sometimes certain authors, it works well for them instantly, and some authors, I don't know, it doesn't. And some authors, it really is a long game of just kind of keeping your book in the minds of readers, because like, I don't know about you, but I have a ton of books that I want to read, and it is it is hard to get to them all, and it's constantly changing. And so part of it is people saying, "Oh, that sounds interesting, I'd like to read that," and putting it on their list. But then, "Oh, that sounds interesting, I'd like to read that. That is on my list. And then, and continuing in that vein, and maybe it ends up being that, because for sure there's books that, who's the author? I might mispronounce her name, but Caroline Leavitt. She's been on my radar for a long time, and a friend recommended one of her books, and I was like, I know that I would love her books. And so I've actually hope to read one of her books like in the next few weeks. But it's one of those things where it's a constant reminder to readers that somebody's out there and their books are recommended. And so I would say, just because like you didn't see a tick in sales from one book tour, one social media book tour, doesn't mean that you wouldn't do it again. You would do it again, and then that gets in front of readers again. And because they probably did put your book on their list, but getting to the book is it's hard. As avid of a reader as a lot of readers are, it's hard to get to everything. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it's this point of, it's this trickle effect.
yeah.
And also, you know, whether they see the same book again on their feed or whether they see another book of yours from a second book tour, you know, it's still keeping you visible. And I guess that's one of the main things, is really visibility, and also, you know, credibility through these reviews that people are sharing. But let's just for a second go back a step. So TLC book tours, how did that come about? Like what need was it that the business is addressing?
So my partner and I, we were bloggers, blogging about books, and this was in 2007, maybe 2006, 2007, and it had just blog tours had just started. There was maybe one company, maybe two, and my partner Lisa approached me in, I don't know, maybe June or July of 2008 and said, "Hey, do you want to actually, I think it was like April of 2008. I want to do this. Do you want to do it with me? I think we could do this better." That's how I end up in a lot of positions in my life, is I see somebody doing something and I think I could improve on that.
Yeah.
And so we started because we had a relationship with the readers already that we could approach. And also, as people who were bloggers, we knew how to approach other bloggers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has translated into how we approach Instagrammers and book talkers. Um, part of it is being understanding that that is not their whole life, and
Mm-hmm.
they are basically doing us a favor, and being gracious when things come up and they can't get the book on the day that we had agreed to. And so that was part of it, was being cognizant of what we wanted to change and how we wanted to do it better, and kind of keeping that in the forefront of our mind this whole time as we transition to Instagram and TikTok. And it's just been a constant evolution of, like most businesses, of just trying to keep up with the times and making sure that what we're offering is relevant. At some point, we were just doing the blog tours, and then we decided, because so many readers are in book clubs, and book clubs are so helpful or crucial to authors, we started a newsletter, and that goes out to, right now, 2,300 individual book clubs across the United States.
Wow.
Because we kind of already had some of those connections. And so it's just always been a trying to do it the best that we can. And
Yeah. No, and I think, it's with many businesses, like Yahoo and Bing kind of took after Google. It's not necessarily that they're trying to kind of rebuild the wheel necessarily, but they are not, well, no, they are. They think they can do it better, and so they create their own version of it, and maybe add in a few other bits like Yahoo News and all of these, MSN. So no, I get that from a business perspective. Absolutely, that's just, I think, a place where many organizations start. And from an author's perspective, what kind of authors do you work with as TLC Book Tours?
we work with, it pretty much runs the spectrum of genres and types of publishing that they've had. So it can go from nonfiction to any kind of genre fiction. Certainly some does better than others, and sometimes we have had to turn certain books away. But for the most part, we work with any genre. Nonfiction can be more difficult. Memoirs are popular amongst authors, but hard to pitch to readers. So sometimes, depending on that, we might need to turn it away. But then, as far as how they've been published, it definitely runs the gamut from, big authors to authors who've self-published. It just depends on, or whether they've done a hybrid or whatever. So it's
so really a range of fictions and genres, and as you say, publishing kind of houses or non-houses. But
yes.
I guess what authors would like to know is, how does it work exactly? So they have a book that they want to put onto a book tour. How do they go about that? What's the process of getting their book out there?
So they would approach us or any other book tour business. I do think we do it a bit differently. So I'll just tell you how we do it.
Yeah.
Is that, if somebody approaches us, then we send them kind of our information sheet that shows the different services we offer. And as long as they choose a service that we think will match up well with their book and the people that we already have, that we already work with, or we think we can find, then that is fine. If they have a memoir and they want a TikTok tour, because TikTok it gears more towards fiction genres like romance, fantasy, then we would say that would be more difficult to pitch to those people. We probably wouldn't be able to do that. But if you want to do an Instagram tour, we could probably do that. So as long as we're matched up, that's great. And then we go out, and because we've worked with so many people, we can approach people based on either what they've liked in the past, what we know they currently read, interests that they have, whether they live near a certain location. It's always fun to read a book that's set near where you live.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of things. We don't have a sign up thing where people can just sign up for any tour. We're approaching people, which is fortunately or like good and bad. It is more time consuming, but I think it results in a better fit for the books.
Yeah.
And then we arrange dates with the we'll call them influencers. We arrange dates with the influencers, and then the author sends out the books, and then the influencer will feature it. They might read it and review it. They're not required to give a positive review, though it's very rare that somebody gives a negative review. And if they really didn't like the book, they 99% of the time will let us know and say, how do you want us to handle that? Then we can kind of do some, we can work with that. And then they feature it. Featuring doesn't mean a review, but it does get, it is kind of like putting it in front of a bunch of people and, for them to say, oh, that sounds like something I would like. As somebody who is on social media all the time, I get a ton of book recommendations this way. I am constantly adding to my list of, oh, that sounds good. That's like right
favorite.
So, and then it's done. We send a wrap up. We make sure that the people that we're working with are active on social media, are, have been on for a while, because it does take some time to get your audience. And we've always done that. And then making sure that kind of it jives with what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So, and then after all is said and done, then we send all the links to the author so that they have them all in one place. And an author doesn't have to be online to do a tour. They can put it in our hands, kind of a set it and forget it. It's not a George Foreman reference. And then, so they can not interact at all. Nobody is expecting them to, or they can interact. It's always nice. I think readers enjoy seeing an author interacting with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's but I also understand that it can be hard for an author to maybe see comments or the
It can be a nerve-wracking experience because they are putting themselves out there in a measure of, speaking. But
Yeah.
so then, it's important that the readers and the authors line up in terms of their interests and the genre that they're reading. I know that we've spoken about this previously because then, you I think also when we talk about readers, is there like a threshold as to the amount of followers that these people have that you have on your kind of roster?
So there is a certain threshold for Instagram followers. We are looking for at least 1,000 followers and 75 to 100 likes for each post. It can vary though, because if you get a really niche book, then sometimes the smaller accounts are what you want, because though sometimes with niche things you have a smaller base. Depending, in that case, I'm thinking of like specific kinds of nonfiction or specific genres of books that are just more just have a smaller following, but you can get those sorts of people. I remember doing one book. I can't remember the publisher. It might have been HarperCollins or somebody, but it was about living solo. That's a very specific audience.
Very niche.
Yes. And that was back even before we were on Instagram, but there was a number of bloggers who blogged about that. And I did kind of lower what we'll call my standards, because that was too high of a standard for that kind of niche. If you're looking for romance, oftentimes you're looking at higher numbers because it's such a bigger market. But for smaller things, you're going to be looking at smaller accounts. But generally, that's kind of our rule of thumb. Because we don't want, it's not worth your money to put it on an account with 30 followers that gets 3 likes. Right? It's just not. You might as well give it to your friend.
Yeah.
But 1,000 followers, and unfortunately, Instagram, TikTok, you'll see it on any social media. One of the constant problems is they are always changing their parameters for how influencers are able to reach their audience.
Yeah.
So it's always this moving target of influencers trying to figure that out. And, so that's something to take into consideration too, that everybody's always hustling to figure out the algorithm, but everybody's trying.
I know. The amount of conversations I've had with people about these damn social media algorithms, they're getting me again. I think as we speak, they changed again like 2 days ago. Like it's ridiculous. And just so that we can frame this out for authors, if we're looking at authors who are kind of the most eligible for book tours, what would you say are those kind of key characteristics that you look for in an author? I know that we've said that there's a range that you cater for, but is there like the perfect candidate for these kinds of book tours?
So if we're talking about like, whether traditionally published or not, and while traditionally published, we'll take it because the company's paying for it, but we're looking for like a good cover. You want something that's going to be appealing.
Marketable.
And then as far as the subject of the book, that it has an audience. Again, you can find it doesn't have to have a huge audience. Like the Living Solo had a smaller audience, but definitely had an audience. And then, as far as authors go, I would just say, the ability to be flexible, and I understand the excitement that comes when your book is going to be featured by somebody, but it happens that people's kids get sick. Sometimes they write down the date wrong or whatever. So I do find it's hard if authors are constantly checking for the post to go up. So if they can just like wait, so somebody that can be more circumspect and wait kind of to the end of the week, and then somebody who can let it be what it is.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's like starting a business. It's about kind of releasing the product and then just letting it go. Just not constantly be checking every 5 minutes, have I got another like? Because that is also mentally quite difficult to feel I've put, there's so much build up to this thing, and then it's not quite going how I want it to go. And as we've already mentioned, these are more slow burn marketing activities for authors to kind of get that word of mouth out there. So it's not going to be that instant. And if it does happen, that's wonderful. But
sometimes you hit on something and everything works out great. But it is more of a lottery kind of thing when that happens.
Yeah. So obviously, presumably, there is a cost to these kinds of services. Mm-hmm. My question is, are there things that authors need to be investing their time and money in first before they consider a book tour?
That's a good question. I would definitely hope that an author has at least a website for people to go and look. I know that sometimes it's nice if they can have an author page that, like on Instagram, that people can tag. It's not very common on TikTok for an author to have a page that can be tagged, because TikTok's just so much more different. But at least a website. But on the other hand, there's such a range, and because like I watched an interview with Andre Dubus III. He doesn't even text. So he does obviously have an author page because he's published by one of the major publishers.
Yeah.
But definitely not on social media. An argument can be made that, well, he's already famous and doing well, but it's.
But there's that reference point, isn't there? It's like, no matter what it is, whether it's an Instagram page or just a website where people can add their, email to add to their mailing list, or even just a summary of all your work with links to buy. Like, that is, I think, a minimum really for all of this.
Just like, because I've looked up books because I just wanted to see maybe does the author have anything else. And if the website is hard to look at or hard to figure out, or if the quotes that they have are weird, it just gives you this weird kind of feeling. And I know that it can be hard when you're looking at it yourself. And so if you can get a friend to look at it, or a reader to really give you somebody that will give you honest feedback, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't stress enough. And how important a good cover is, because I'm thinking of one in particular. It's I don't even know that it was self-published. There's been a number in traditional publishing that I've looked at it and gone, I would definitely not pick that book up based on that. It's not appealing at all. But then even more so, if you're doing a lot of the work yourself, you really want something that is going to make people want to pick it up. And because then that translates to your website, because oftentimes the website will tie in with the book cover even if it just has the book cover on the page. So you can have a nice website ruined by a mediocre cover. This is obviously, like I mentioned, a blunder that even big publishing houses do with some covers that everybody goes, Yeah. It's kind of an ongoing conversation
Yeah.
all the time. So it's, always something to look at and something to really be mindful of, because it's the reader's first invitation to read the book.
And I'm imagining that editing is also an incredibly important investment that authors have to put, time and money into.
Yes, a really, and it's hard because I know that even, again, traditionally published books can blunder this. You see it a lot. With some better editing, this would have been good. But especially with books that haven't gone the traditional publishing route, you're looking at, readers are going to notice. I would say a lot of readers, at least the people that I notice, they are good at grammar. They notice things. And so you really want to be on your game with having had a really good editor to not only make sure that it reads easily, but then also, that the story flows, and anything that can be tightened up and because it will get mentioned, fortunately or unfortunately, it definitely gets mentioned occasionally into,
Yeah.
blog tours. It happens.
Yeah, at some point it's going to come up,
Yeah.
whether it's in the book tour or whether it's on Goodreads or
Yeah.
Amazon reviews, whatever it is. And so I just wanted to ask, in terms of the timings of this, is there like the perfect time to have a book launch? Do you need to start thinking about it before the release? Do you do it after the release? What would you say is like a good time for a book tour to happen?
That's a great question, and something that a lot of authors ask us about. And my out my opinion and my partner's opinion is that there's never a bad time to do a book tour, because it is just word of mouth. It's but I know that a lot of authors want the book tour to happen around launch, because there's a lot of hype around, there's already a lot of excitement, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
just your own excitement about the book getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of think that because there's already excitement around the book launching, whatever you might be doing, that you can kind of let that wave ride, and then you can do a book tour. There's never, even if a book is a couple years old. I have a client who, her books were published by a small press. They are, what would they be? They'd be categorized, they're erotica, so they're spicy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a tour for her probably, my memory's not great, but I was probably 10 years ago. And
I'm
so this was before Instagram, before TikTok. Spicy books have become huge. And
crazy.
yes, and they were not huge 10 years ago in the same way. I think they did have an audience, but it wasn't the same way. And it's a trilogy. And the final book just came out, and she said, I want to do another tour. I want to send them all 3 books, and I'd like them to review one of the books. And I was like, oh, it is really hard to ask people to commit to a trilogy. I mean, it's
Yeah.
reading one book is hard. Like I absolutely, a friend recommended a book. I loved it. And I instantly went to the second book and saw it was 18 hours. And I was like, instantly put on the brakes. Like, I can't commit to that kind of investment right now. I'll get back to it after a few smaller books.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this series, I wasn't sure, because it's been 10 years. This is not a new series. And her and review tours can be harder because not everybody wants to review. It's hard to review books. You have to kind of have a way with words. You have to be able to articulate your words, your thoughts, articulate your words, articulate your thoughts.
I got you. I know what you meant.
And her tour is going to be packed. I'm blown away that it has been no problem filling this tour, because they know they're getting 3 books. They know they're reviewing the first one. And if you're in for the first one, you're probably in for the whole trilogy if you like it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so I don't necessarily think that you have to do it at release time or anything like that. It is nice, and I understand why an author would want to do that, and we will definitely work with somebody to try to make that happen. As far as lead time goes, we need at least 8 to 10 weeks for any kind of tour.
Mm-hmm.
A small percentage of them can be done a bit faster, but for the most part, that's kind of the lead time. So sometimes we see authors looking a year in advance or 6 months in advance, and that's just nice as far as planning goes. So the farther in advance you can start planning, I would say anybody who is helping an author is really happy to see an author doing something that far in advance, because then you know that they'll have all the information they need.
Yeah, and I guess it's, this is a multi-channel marketing strategy. You have to have your website and newsletters. You've got to have your social media agenda, and then, tacking in the book tours into that, any podcasts or book club, So really, it's another strand to that kind of omni-channel marketing approach. I just had a quick question for you about how do authors measure the success? And I know that we've said that it's kind of a trickle approach, but is there a way for them to measure this?
That's a really good question. It can be, I know that authors want to measure it by book sales, but oftentimes book sales aren't, like, it happens months later. I don't know how fast Amazon is about turning around numbers. And the other thing is that I know, as somebody who reads, oftentimes I'm writing down a book, but I'm not buying it right then. I might get
Mm-hmm.
it later. We follow up after a tour with the number of followers, the number of likes, comments, um, shares if it's on TikTok, or views if it's on TikTok or Instagram Reels. Um, we are really looking for, like, really good engagement. So
Mm-hmm.
the comments aren't quite as organic, in that oftentimes people are asking a question that may or may not be related to the book, but it gets people to stay for the book.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I am on social media all the time. I'm wondering, what people are commenting. And so oftentimes people will ask a question, but then not all the comments are just answering the question. Some people will say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to read that book," or "I read it and I loved it." And so I'm often, like, scrolling the comments to see what are people saying, whether they answer the question or not.
Yeah.
So we're looking for good engagement, with comments. That, in social media's lifespan so far, that is kind of an always moving target. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily, just because you get 0 comments or 4 comments doesn't mean that it wasn't successful.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different, you can get, there is so many people on social media who just don't comment.
Yeah.
It's kind of always been that way. You see more people who don't comment or engage than you see people who do. So we are looking for, hopefully, some really good engagement, and we do prioritize the influencers who get good engagement, but I don't cut out people who have less engagement, because we're always trying to get different audiences. And
Yeah. And you never know, just because they might have low engagement one day, the algorithm might change and they might have high engagement. So, it's
yes.
it's you can't be picky. No, that sounds great. And thank you for answering my questions today, Trish. We are running out of time, unfortunately. But if there was one piece of advice that you could give to authors, possibly, more specifically about book tours, but it's up to you. What would that one piece of advice be?
I would say, don't give up. I work with an author who was traditionally published, and then during COVID, took her books out. And I understand that she already had something of an audience, so that was a possibility for her. But at some point in doing tours for her, she said, well, let's do something different. I want to do TikTok. And I was like, all right. And she said, and I think I'll create an account so that people have something to tag.
Mm.
And she got on there, and I mean, her first couple videos probably just, mediocre. What are you going to do? Does anybody hit it right out the gate? But I don't know. Maybe her third video, she had like 30,000 views, and so she really found another audience that way.
Yeah.
And but the thing is that she's never stopped trying to um change what she's doing. And she'll do the same things but then add in something different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think of like an analogy of like a duck on the pond. They might seem like they're just hanging out, but their little feet are just going like crazy under the water. And that's kind of how you have to be as I would say, an author or any kind of entrepreneur. You always
Mm-hmm.
have to be working and angling. And who knows, maybe this worked well then, isn't working so well now, but maybe it'll work again another time, because things become stale, but then they become new again. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
um, is ever new. There was a kid I saw the other day who put his sweatshirt on backwards. And, I told a parent, like, yeah, that's, they did that. They were doing that 20 years ago, so things always kind of come back.
Yeah.
So, just don't give up, and just keep working. I know it can be exhausting. And, in that same vein, if you know that doesn't work for you, then don't beat yourself up over it, and work with what does, because
Mm-hmm.
people will find you in the manner to which you are able to put yourself out there.
Thank you so much, Trish. It's been
Yeah.
wonderful to chat to you and to learn more about, book tours and how they work, and how authors can use this as another strand in their marketing strategy. It's been wonderful. And for anyone who is listening and wants to learn more about TLC Book Tours, then please visit their website at tlcbooktours.com, or follow them on Instagram and BookTok at TLC Book Tours. And Trish, once again, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Erica.